Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We are so excited to welcome Don Berger as our closing keynote speaker. Don is truly one of the great event tech entrepreneurs. He founded the company Social Tables in 2011. He grew the company and eventually sold it to Cvent for $100 million. He is one of my great industry friends. I love following him on Twitter and seeing his discussion. We've spoken together at quite a few events in the past, and one thing I love about Don is he has some predictions that always go against the grain, and we have great discussions about it. We love to disagree about different things, so I'm very glad that he's joining us. A couple notes. During the session today, we're going to keep this as interactive as possible. So when you have questions, please ask them in the chat. So on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the chat for the closing notes. Choose the questions tab and ask your questions there. And then throughout the presentation, I'm going to pause Don and ask him some questions. And then at the end, we'll open it up for more questions. And maybe I'll even have a couple of my own. So again, Don, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you, Swapcard. It's actually, I don't really get nervous before speaking, but when friends are on the line or they put you up to the task, it's like, I don't want them down. So I think this is my second speech after, I guess, during quarantine, and it's very nice to be back on the stage, if you will. I'm actually in Santa Fe, New Mexico. First time ever. If you haven't been here, it's an incredible city. So I'm in good spirits. Anyway, this is going to be a very fast-paced presentation. I have pretty high standards for myself, considering this is referred to as the closing keynote. And thank you for that kind of introduction, Matthew. Let's go ahead and start. So this is predictions for the decade. And before I do anything else, I want to quickly just kind of cover my story to hopefully give you a little bit of background on me and why I'm a keen observer of technology and trends. First and foremost, I'm a participant. I've been going to meetings and events for as long as I can remember, whether it was a protest against the Republican National Convention when they came to New York City when I was a college-age kid, or whether it's going to music festivals. I'm actually a part owner in a music festival. So I'm a participant through and through. I'm a planner. I used to work for an association. In fact, I ran New York City's largest young professional association for folks in politics in the mid 2000s, and I've been planning programs and events my whole life. I'm also an entrepreneur. As Matthew mentioned, I started Social Tables about 10 years ago. In 2011, I sold it to Cvent, which is the leading event technology company out there, a year and a half ago. And then I left the company in December after a year, and kind of been doing my thing since then. And finally, and probably most importantly, I'm a believer. I really believe in the power of meetings and events. And I think that in times like these, we all can agree they're more important than ever. So I really believe that when people get together, they can achieve great things. That was the vision at Social Tables. It's why I have the Social Tables tattoo on my arm, and why I just got a pineapple on my other arm. The power of hospitality and bringing people together is something I can really get behind, regardless of how stressful the time may be. Before I get started and really kick it into high gear, I want to go over the rules of the road, if you will. So I'm going to just share with you data up front. Anything that I kind of say, I like to give data points to prove the reasoning behind it. The trends based off of this data will then be delivered. I will then make a big prediction off of these trends for the next decade. And a couple of notes. The first one is this is meant to expand your thinking, not to scare you. There may be some things that kind of make your jaw drop or make you second guess, the decisions you've made in your life. But is my favorite quote from Vanilla Sky, and probably all time ever: every passing moment is another opportunity to change it all around. So I hope that you're integrating self-development, professional development into your quarantine routine, whatever that may be. And this is a perfect time for that. And the fact that you are tuned in right now is indicative of the fact that you are interested in expanding your knowledge. So I commend you for that. And then while I understand we have a global audience, some of this data is global, but most of it is US based. So with that, let's kick it into high gear and share with you hundreds of data points, 50 trends, 11 predictions in 40 minutes, I guess 35 after that long introduction. But before we do any of that, we need to get out of our temporary reality, which is COVID-19. As you can see on the left-hand side, the really Spanish flu came in 3 waves, and a lot of people are making the same kind of comparisons. So this is really here to stay until the vaccine is here. And so, despite the fact COVID-19 is true depression era feels, if you will, that it is a current state, but we have to really look at the events in a greater context. So therefore, it's important to look past the kind of 18 months that will take us to sort this thing out, to understand where things are going. And while early signals may be accelerated and become standards, things that kind of were peaking their head are now going to become mainstream. More traditional ways of doing things may take a little long time to change, despite how jarring the pandemic has been. So let's start with hotels. Hotels are obviously key suppliers in the events industry. And in 2019, global hotel investments held steady. As you can see from the chart, it's really been the same amount of investment over the past decade since the Great Recession of 2008, 2009. That obviously has changed pretty much overnight. Speaking of hotels and building hotels, convention hotels have really become a thing of the past. And we're going to see in a little bit that now builders are going to even build either more meeting space because we're going to need it because of social distancing, or less meeting space because they'll say events are not going to come back for a while. But the reality is convention hotels have become a thing of the past for the past 5 years. You can see the number of new convention hotels, which have 50,000 square feet or more space, is really limited to just a handful. And when it comes to building hotels, limited and select service, or the mainstream brands as they're referred to, are really the name of the game, especially in the US. Globally, it's always been small hotels, but in the US, it's funny, we buy big cars and build small hotels. You can see on this chart that really the bulk of the new builds, about 72% of them, almost 3/4, are in the upscale and upper mid-scale range, and some mid-scale. So there's very little variance in what's being built, and luxury hotels and upper upscale are not really being built as fast as the limited hotels because that's where people are staying. So what's going on in the industry? Let me unfurl this so you can kind of take it in as I speak through it. Hotel owners are diving into the details. Before the pandemic, they were very hands-on, and now they're going to be even more hands-on because their assets are losing money. They're not even reporting ADR, average daily rates, really just talking occupancy. Hoteliers will continue to be hands-on as they become more sophisticated and concerned. Chains will continue to invest in the kind of select and limited service we talked about, because you don't need big hotel space anymore, event space anymore, because so many planners are choosing to go outside of the four walls and don't want to go to the ballroom for their program. Revenue managers will focus on smaller groups more than ever, because the reality is you really can't have large groups for at least another year. So you're going to have smaller groups, and we're going to see those costing more. And 2019 pretty much was the last year of hospitality growth. And you may recall this was kind of referred to as, for quite almost a decade, it was referred to as a seller's market. Well, we're actually entering a new decade where it's a buyer's market. And planners, more than ever, have the ability of having stronger bargaining power. So with that, I want to quickly switch over to Matthew, see if there are any comments or questions from the audience, and I'll come back to the next section.
Yeah, hey everyone online, please ask your questions in the comments. We don't have any yet, Don, so why don't we keep going? I'll pause you in a little bit as the questions start to come in.
Sounds great. So moving on, let's talk about food and beverage, because food and beverage represents such a large chunk of the spend when it comes to meetings and events. Well, over the last 2 decades, U.S. meat consumption has shifted towards chicken. Pork is the kind of choice in Asia. Beef has been the American choice for quite some time, but poultry has been rising, and you can see towards the right side of this chart. We're going to take that into account, so keep that in mind. We're going to come back to it. And when it comes to beef consumption, the U.S. is clearly an outlier. As you can see, we are all the way to some of the biggest beef eaters in the world, right after Uruguay, Argentina, and Brazil, which is kind of shocking if you think about it. The rest of the world doesn't consume as much cattle as we do. We know they're bad for the environment. We know that they're not necessarily great for your health. So the consumer taste is shifting, not just because of the fact they like chicken, but also because they're alternative meats, and those are picking up steam. You can see Beyond Meat. This is their stock performance over time. I took a snapshot of it this morning. It was riding at 250 per share high in the middle of last year, and then now it's about about $140 a share. It was 90 just a few weeks ago. So it's fluctuating quite a lot. But alternative meats are picking up steam. It's almost like the new seltzer version in spirits, and that's next. Beer consumption. Ironically, beer and hamburgers go well together. Beer accounts for less than 50% of alcohol consumption for the first time. And you can see spirits and wines are picking up, and obviously alcoholic seltzers are becoming the thing, and that will slowly also be introduced into events. So the reality is that every aspect of food and beverage is being challenged, from costs all the way to actual choices. Lab-grown meats are starting to replace ingredients, and they're actually leapfrogging vegetarian and vegan meals. The vegetarian and vegan movement has been around for a long time, but it really hasn't caught on if you think about it from a mainstream perspective, maybe in a few cities, but it really hasn't become a nationwide trend. Therefore, lab-grown meats can kind of leapfrog the vegan diet, much like the cell phone kind of leapfrogged laptops in a lot of developing countries, for lack of a better analogy. And another unfortunate reality is that alcohol consumption has more negative impact than positive impact. Sure, it's a kind of social lubricant, but it also leads to a lot of just unfortunate accidents. And people are becoming more and more aware of that. So CBD infused drinks may appear as an alternative to alcohol because they just have a different effect on consumers. But alcohol might be a thing of the past in the future, as events try to appeal to the sober curious. More and more bars are popping up in different cities that offer alcohol-free beverages and actually don't serve alcohol at all. And because of the fact that fine dining and restaurants cost a lot of money and usually fail, local fast casual concepts will start taking place, the place of restaurants and hotels, especially as we are more mindful of how distant we are from each other, and we want to make sure that we maximize every square foot of retail. So imagine, for those who are in Austin, you may know Torchy's, which is a famous taco place. Imagine a Torchy's in a hotel, for example. So with that, it brings me to the next prediction, which is most events will be meatless and many alcohol-free. And food may even be optional. The reason food may be optional is twofold. The first, it's really actually threefold. The first, it's really expensive. The second is because people may not actually trust the food that they get. Obviously, you can't have buffets anymore, and that's usually the kind of cost-effective solution if you're not doing kind of French service or dinner courses. And third, so it costs money. It's somewhat of a public health issue. And finally, there may be technology that will be replacing meals altogether. And if you think about it, while food brings us together, there are many other opportunities to bring people together at events. And it actually kind of wastes time. Having a meal wastes an hour to 2 hours. And if you can just solve it by taking a pill that would satiate your hunger, a lot of planners and attendees may choose to do that. All right, Matthew, kicking off to you to see if there are any questions, haters, yellows.
Yeah. Well, we've got a couple coming in. You always have some bold predictions. So going back a little bit to the start of your presentation, you personally, when would you feel comfortable returning back to a convention or a conference?
So look, I'm pretty bullish on let me say a couple things. First of all, full disclosure, I own part of a music festival, which was supposed to take place Memorial Day weekend, the last weekend of May. And we moved that to September. We'll most likely have to move it again. I'm also an investor in hotels. Look, and I'm also an investor in restaurants. So pretty much like I bet on the consumer economy all the time, especially when it comes to hospitality. In the beginning, I'm just gonna be very blunt here. In the beginning, I was very pro quarantine. I was very bullish. For 5 weeks, I stayed at home in Washington, D.C., didn't move, didn't see people. But it kind of felt like it was all in vain, because while I was sitting at home, there was really no coordinated effort in the 50 states. So without a coordinated effort, this is a lost cause. And in my view, the only way we have to get back to normal because of the fact that we just don't have a clear leadership and a plan. So I would feel confident returning to a convention immediately, although I don't think that that's possible. I'm past the point of worrying because we're not prepared no matter what, unfortunately.
Yeah. So to follow up with that, During the last recession, it took hotels and events about 5 years to return to their 2007 peaks as far as capacity and prices. How long do you think it will take this time for both events, conferences, trade shows, and then also hotels to get back up to their 2019 numbers?
So generally speaking, recessions last for an average of 11 months. Some can take a little longer. If we are entering a depression, which I think is kind of what some folks say, and what I unfortunately believe, it'll take longer. The general, what I've heard is on the business side, 3 years. So to have enough capital, if you're a small business owner, for about 3 years, and there's the math behind it is like 1 year for every month or something like that. But therefore, you can assume that everything is, that's a leading indicator. So events are a lagging indicator in a way. So probably 2 years after that. So to return to the peak 2019, I think 5 years is an accurate estimate, unfortunately.
Okay, well, hopefully comes back sooner.
Because
we'll see.
You have to keep in mind there's more supply on the market, and I'm going to talk about it soon. There's more demand. There's more middle class. Events are more important than ever. So there's more demand, and it's pent up. So the floodgates will open at some point. And there's also more supply. Building is continuing because it's considered an essential service. Home sharing is a thing that's not going away. Prices of homes have stayed the same, really. So people are still, the market's on a pause. So there's going to just be more inventory, more demand. And once it unleashes, it'll actually be better than 2019. Great.
Let's move on to your F&B comments. So we have a few questions around that. I'll ask you a couple of them. You can choose how to respond. So the first one is, hotels obviously have F&B minimums when you're booking their convention space. So how are they going to adjust, or will they allow you to skip F&B? Will they start charging full rates for room rentals instead of offering kind of subsidized rates, knowing you're spending the money on the F&B? And then the follow-up to that, if we eliminate food and alcohol, how are we going to spur people to network and to meet each other, to connect? If you're in sessions all day long, what's going to get you to go out in the evening as well if you're not being given a meal?
Look, I'll be honest with you. I think giving meals, giving food, giving alcohol is lazy networking. Okay. If you're an event planner and you're an experienced designer, you're focused on objectives, and one of those objectives is networking, then it's on you to come up with ways to ensure people network. Putting a bar doesn't guarantee networking. That's so lazy to me. Making people sit together is lazy to me. That's essentially betting on serendipity, and that's stupid. Planners have to actually be more thoughtful when it comes to creating networking environments, designing the right environment, creating the right space for that, both physically and emotionally and mentally for attendees, making sure they do the homework and they connect people in a thoughtful way. There's just so many things that you can do. You can do games and a concierge service for networking. I think if you just focus on food, it's quite lazy. And the response to the other one, I think, was around how will they make money if there's no F&B. Is that right? No catering?
Well, hotels have minimums, when you book.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, they waive the minimum when, you book, they may waive, they have a minimum in order to get the meeting space. And then really what they do is they say, okay, the meeting space costs this, but if you buy this, we'll give it to you for, an alternative price or for free. I think hotels have to be more creative and offer more products than just food and beverage and flip charts. Starwood, for a time before they were acquired by Marriott, they were playing with the idea of providing apps for their events. It didn't really go that well, but it was innovative. Finding new ways of delivering value to your planners other than F&B, catering, and AV will behoove venues in order to diversify revenues and not just focus on the old.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. In the meantime, when we are feeding our participants, I think that that trend may take quite a while to disappear. But as you are feeding them, what can hotels change to serve people safely? I think the days of standing in line for a buffet probably aren't going to be seen for quite a while.
Well, obviously the brown paper bag lunch is going to come back. Another one is, and this is what I've traveled over the country over the past 6 weeks, I've seen, I've had different, I've seen a sample of what different establishments are doing. There's a few things you can do. First of all, I think it's really important to any disinfecting kind of process you have you do it in front of the attendee, not behind closed doors and just put on the wall that you do it. It's important to establish confidence by showing what you're doing. So providing the wipes to let people clean their chair. This is going to impact what kind of equipment hotels buy. The ones, whether it's the ones that are more sterile, the ones that can be easily cleaned, the ones that viruses don't live on. I mean, thank God, I think this may finally be the end of banquet chairs that are and Shivari covers. But yeah, I mean, showing the disinfecting is, I think, really important. That's a huge piece of it, and communicating super effectively what you're doing in a very kind of colloquial way. SoulCycle did a really wonderful job of sharing what they're doing behind closed doors to give confidence to riders, and I think they did a good job. I'm going to keep going. All right, so let's talk about personal data. Obviously, this is something that's top of mind for all of us, and consumers are more concerned about their personal data than ever before. In globally, about 40% of folks really care about what companies are doing with their personal data. But in the US, it's about 60%. The US is kind of some parts are more conspiratorial than others, but you can see how we can compare to China, for example, 30% versus 60%. So there's a lot of privacy concerns amongst US consumers. But that's because a lot of the companies that we give our data to are just not trusted. You compare Microsoft to Facebook. More Americans think that only 2% of Americans think Microsoft causes harm, while Facebook thinks that 59%, while Americans think 59% of Facebook will cause more harm. So that's pretty jarring, and it's something that we use every day, not just for social networking, but also to sign into things. Most of our accounts are associated with Facebook. And this is a little old, but I think it's important. I want to make sure that people understand big tech regulation, the idea of, decoupling monopolies and acknowledging that there are tech monopolies is not a political issue. Regulating big tech is not a political issue. You can see that Republicans and Democrats agree that they need to be regulated. But it's hard. It's hard because every year that passes, we spend, roughly about 5% more time in front of digital devices. Now, not just one, but two, maybe even three if we're wearing a watch or a connected device. And the daily hours spent on digital media in 2018 was 6.3 hours. You can see a precipitous increase year on year of about 0.3 to 0.5 hours. And that's related to cell phone usage. God only knows what this year always lacks behind. But 2020, I mean, people don't even care about screen time anymore because that's the only thing they have in order to interact with people. So we're spending more time in front of digital media. And that has that doesn't have just implications over the fact that we're concerned about privacy because it's constantly being collected, but also about the fact that face-to-face is becoming more coveted and more important than ever. So back to the question we received earlier, events will come with a bang because people will just fiend for face-to-face time. And I'll also talk about offices and how I think they're not going away. But anyway, privacy and safety standards will be higher. Let me unfurl all these because there's a lot. GDPR-inspired regulation will be the global norm. GDPR is obviously the European regulation around data collection, and it is seen as a very consumer-friendly. That will eventually come to the United States. Most companies have to abide by it because they're global anyway. Device-free events will be welcomed and enforced. We'll want off-the-grid events, disconnected events. Sort of like when you go to a comedy show and you take the phone so you don't take videos, we'll begin to see that in events. Events will be the target of hackers and bad actors because of the reality that you have a lot of similar people in the same place. So why not hack that network? And some attendees will go badgeless and choose to be anonymous because of just how, because they don't want people to know who they are. There are certain conferences out there right now, especially in the hacking community, where people have pseudonyms and they don't even know what their names are. So with that, attendee safety and privacy expectations will reach new heights. Matthew, back to you.
Yeah, so let's pause you and ask a couple more questions. So just moving a little bit away from business events, think about consumer events. Do you think we'll return to consumer events in public spaces or shopping centers or parks and things like that?
Yeah, not only will they return, they're actually, a recent study out of Hong Kong came out that says most of the people that contracted COVID did so indoors. So the data shows that pandemics such as coronaviruses are not as contagious outside. So I think more and more events will take place outside. There'll be greater investment in ventilation systems. So to just rent the tent, you also rent a serious hospital grade ventilation system. We'll start seeing those kinds of, I'll talk about in a second, those kind of standards creep their way into contracts. So yes, I do think consumer will be back. I think there'll be a lot of releases, a lot of testing when you get there. There'll be another layer of security in terms of health. But yeah, they'll be back. And again, more important than ever. You have to understand, unfortunately, in the consumer space, there's really only two companies that control most of it, especially concerts and festivals. That's AEG and Live Nation. They together, they're responsible for 2/3 of ticket sales, which is really sad. And unfortunately, situations like this kill small businesses and independent folks, and they'll just become stronger, just like Walmart and other folks find a way to, or Amazon are becoming stronger because of this. So this is really bad for independent promoters, from artists that don't have the representation from the big talent agencies. And every day that passes, that artists that charge a lot that can't be booked, their price is going to go up because they're limited in how much they can do. So concerts will actually increase in price, unfortunately.
Yeah, and who do you think will be the winners coming out of these events? This crisis. You see a lot of companies are adjusting quickly, others are adjusting slowly. So who's actually going to come out as a winner from the crisis?
The biggest companies, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's that could be scary.
Yeah, it is.
All right. Well, yeah. Let's keep going, and we'll definitely have quite a few more questions towards the end here.
Wonderful. All right. So public health is the newest skill planners will need to study. I foresee there being, just like there is the event design certificate, there's going to be event health certificate, and it's just another kind of another arrow in the quiver of event planners. And events will require more square footage due to social distancing regulations and on-site testing. Just a few months ago, we were talking about how events are taking less and less square footage, less and less of a footprint. Now they're going to need more footprint because suddenly your check-in, your badging is going to require social distancing for the foreseeable future. And again, this is just because we want to give our attendees and participants a little more confidence. We're going to have to keep this going, even though this thing's going to go away. So just because it might be solved in 18 months, this is going to continue for many more months after that. So, there's always new regulations, and then they kind of take time to dissipate. So events will require more space. That will increase the cost. That will obviously limit supply because there's less availability. And as a result, we're going to enter a seller market very soon after this. Again, public health officers, PPE, disinfectants, and other health products like temperature check, automated temperature checks will add complexity and cost to events. And again, you're doing a lot of this for show. You're not doing this to instill confidence. You're not necessarily doing it because you have to or because it's logical. And venue hygiene standards will be part of contracts, and force majeure will be redefined. There were a lot of hotel companies that were more lenient, but the reality is the many venues and suppliers didn't have to do refunds because pandemics are generally not covered. So public health management is an event's latest feature, if you will. I'm going to skip over questions here, Matthew, and let's get to the next one because we kind of covered this in the past. Is that okay?
Sounds good.
Great. All right, so let's talk about work. And events are a really important piece of the way we work. And even before the pandemic, employers were embracing remote work. 52% of employees work remotely at least once per week pre-pandemic. Now that's about 95%. And you can see the kind of categories. The one thing that's come to light over the past few months is how critical blue-collar work is to our economy. White-collar folks are sitting at home on their laptops, drinking their coffee, and they don't have to go out in order to work. But the folks that they rely on to service them and provide them with the products they need are putting themselves in danger. So hopefully this will have some human rights implications as well when it comes to things like a living wage and so on. But let me not veer off too much on that path. But remote work is being embraced and has been embraced. And freelancers are a growing part of the economy. The number of Americans who freelance was at 57 million in 2018. And in 2008, 1.3 million Americans made their living in part through eBay. So a lot of folks have multiple jobs, and that's just the American way. And that creates a problem because people lack a professional identity when it comes to a brand association. And co-working is really the new normal. Pop-up co-working spaces will become the norm in events. There'll probably be big dividers in them, but they'll still need them because people are constantly working multiple jobs perhaps. Hotels will offer co-working amenities as they transform into lifestyle products. For those who don't know, a lifestyle product is kind of more representative of what your style is, what your vibe is, what your energy is, and you choose a product based off of that. And hotels are shifting towards that. Internal events will be seen as a key tool to engage remote workers. You know, when you don't have an office, you really lack a lot of the cultural artifacts and a lot of the kind of the smell of the place, the vibe of the place. You lack that. And the office is really important to indoctrinate and instill a sense of loyalty to an organization. So internal events will be a way to engage remote workers. And new meeting formats will be created to better include the remote workforce. Technologies haven't been even invented yet. And finally, the office will be more important than ever for the reasons I cited. So with that, planners will integrate co-working and remote attendance into their programs. And there was a lively kind of chat on Twitter the other day about, or just this morning or last night or whatever, about hybrid events. It's kind of meeting, this really doesn't mean much. It's just like everything is hybrid, right? If it's got an internet connection, it's hybrid. But really hybrid for me is when planners add value, remote attendees add as much value as real time attendees and vice versa. That has to take place, and we're not there yet. Matthew?
Yeah, so a couple of questions have come up. Thinking about co-working spaces and the value that offices provide, we're seeing a lot of companies say that, remote work could continue forever. Twitter came out and they said, if your job doesn't require you to be in the office, you don't have to come back. One of my good friends who works at Amazon, his team has basically been told if they can stay as productive at home, they never have to go back to the office. So let's think of how that applies to events. Obviously, pretty much every event is switching to a completely virtual event. So are virtual events a kind of a temporary trend to get us through this crisis, or will virtual events be a long-term solution for all events?
Okay, so you asked two different questions. Let me tackle them independently. The first one is around remote work and whether it's going away. No, I think any remote worker, sure, it sounds fine in the beginning. It's easy to say, look, we're doing the same amount of work as we did before. We're going to cut costs by lowering rent. We're going to be more effective and productive because there are less distractions. That's bullshit in my view, because you're going to have just less loyalty to your organization if people don't come together. So imagine for a second a world where everybody's remote, okay? Or, a majority of the workforce is remote that can be remote. That's fine. But guess what? That means you need more events to bring people together. So imagine a monthly retreat where there's even daycare provided. That's fine. But then you have to restructure the entire way you work. So instead of taking your budget, which is really office rent is part of your, it's part of your P&L and any company, but it's actually an HR expense because you have a safe space for people to come together, form tribes, get indoctrinated, get, the blood flowing with whatever the color of your logo, your company is. And you don't get that right now. So I don't buy for a second that you can say remote workers are as engaged as those that are in the office. It's why at Social Tables, I was very adamant about paying $1.2 million a year on rent, and we built a 31,000 square foot space that was very eclectic and really pushed the envelope at the time it was built, because I recognized how important it was to have physical space. And events do that. Events are nothing more than a container, a delivery container for a marketing activity, for a networking activity, for a sales activity. That's a promotional activity. Events are just a container. But the reason why they're important is because they have that physical container. And I think that that's just more important than ever. I think I just answered the first question. What was just the topic of the second question?
Yeah. So with virtual events, are virtual events a temporary?
Oh, yeah. So virtual events are, they're not temporary, but they are an additional product. Virtual events are essentially a commodity. Okay. It's easier to do. There's less people involved. It's cheaper. And attendees are not going to pay $3,000 to go to your silly virtual event. They can log in and out. They can watch, CNN in the background or whatever. They can multitask. It is just not the same. So I think they're an additional product that's gaining momentum and will not go away. but it's definitely going to augment a program, a greater program, rather than replace it.
Yeah, well, continuing from that, when the quarantine rules came out, like here in Washington State, where I am, first you weren't allowed to have events over 1,000 people, then 250, then 100, and then like 5. And the reverse rollout from quarantine may be similar, where small events are allowed before large events. Do you think that will be a long-term trend? Like, will large events take quite a while to come back? Will large events split into smaller events, or split from online and in person?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a few things. Number one, it's going to be more important than ever, especially during the time of regulation, to really be judicious with who attends an event, right? Price of an event might increase, but because of limited capacity, but you really want to choose wisely who is actually going to the event to make sure those people get value. So I do think events will get smaller. I'm actually concerned about the word event. I think we're going to need to do some lobbying to make sure the word event is not negative. Even the word party is dangerous these days. So there's a lot of weight that words carry, and I'm concerned into the vilification of that word. But yeah, I think and I'm going to talk about this a little more, but exclusivity, we have to be able to balance exclusivity and inclusivity in a time where there's high regulation. But I think it'll just be kind of, it'll be in intervals. So 100, 250, 1,000, whatever. I'm going to keep going. I have so much more to say, and this is, okay, I'm going to go fast. All right, so community events are growing as people see connectedness. These are just numbers from meetup.com. Meetup.com is done about 250,000 meetups a month, which is basically the internet's introduced this new kind of category of events, which is, affinity groups. And I'm going to skip over that. And that's just like I said, events must balance inclusivity and exclusivity. HR is going to devote more resources for employee events. Like I mentioned, employee events are going to be more important than sales and marketing events because of that war for talent. And right now, obviously unemployment is very high, but once the economy picks back up, in my view, in the next 18 months, the war for talent will resume, and therefore you need events to differentiate your company. Employers will provide event and meeting planning training for their employees because they realize that everything is an event, whether it's a one-on-one or an all hands or a team meeting. You have to have a good meeting in order to engage your workforce, and most people don't know how to have a good meeting. Like I said, company events will be viewed as perks, and more platforms will emerge to help people create face-to-face communities. This is really important. We are now at a time where we seek to be connected through shared passions and values and skills and activities, and there are not enough platforms that do that to bring us together. So I think we'll see more of that. Events that provide attendees a sense of belonging will win. I can't stress this enough. At a time where people question their own identities, where it's becoming more complex, events that provide attendees a sense of belonging will win. And the question for any event planner is, how do I do that? How do I give people a sense of belonging? Because guess what? A sense of belonging means retaining your attendees. I'm going to skip over you, Matthew, and I'm going to go to the next one, and we can do it together. All right. New digital supply channels for group business emerge monthly. These are all different types of places you can find meeting space, whether it's in a hotel, a venue, or in a kind of non-traditional space. You can see this is the list. I'm sure there's more. I don't follow that space as closely as I used to. And group business is just growing in complexity. I think this pandemic is going to essentially, quite frankly, hopefully kill third-party planners in the sense that they'll lose market share. I think they're an unnecessary burden most of the time. A lot of the work they do can be replaced with technology, except for those who really add value, which they exist. Many of them do. Suppliers will proactively reach out to qualified planners using sales enablement tools. So think about the fact, if I'm a hotel sales rep, I'm sitting on my computer, I open up my CRM, Salesforce or whatever, and it tells me which planners to call as opposed to me cold calling. That's the new category of sales enablement tools that will emerge in our industry. Oh my God, so many predictions. I'm going to focus on a couple. You can read them, but the ones I want to focus on is that CVBs will focus on economic impact rather than room nights, because room nights are just not representative of how many people go to your event and how much you're generating for the local economy. That's the last one. And the other one is non-traditional event spaces will compete with hotels and venues. I talked about that before. There was one more I want to talk about. Which one? Is it here? All right, I'm going to skip over it. All right, Matthew, take it away. The final kind of thought here is that there will be more ways to source groups and meetings.
Yeah, these were some fantastic predictions, Don. It's always great to hear what you have to say. I wanted to look back right before we end to some predictions you made during a panel that we were on back in, I believe it was 2013.
We're not done yet, Matthew. We're not done.
Okay, well, you got a minute left. So
okay, I got a minute left. I'm gonna do one. I'm gonna do one more. You're gonna get that question in a second.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just give you the kind of high levels. So technology will augment the way we plan for the better. I think the price of event software will go down. It's becoming commoditized. I think drones will start taking pictures, and photographers will take out of the back seat, kind of controlling them. I think robots, which can essentially do a lot of predictable physical work, will start setting up rooms, tearing them down. This will be even faster. This kind of technology will come into play even faster because of the fact that people want to limit the number of people in a room. So, and the number of and the amount of contact you have. So this, anytime there's something like this, technology really jumps forward. And I think this is one of those areas, events are one of those areas where we'll see a lot of innovation soon. And then finally, my favorite one is events will be more accessible, both in terms of attendees and location. Because of autonomous vehicles, because of home sharing and the kind of opening of a lot of markets that have been open in the past and don't have enough supply, we can get to places not just faster, we can work while we get there, we can sleep in different places, we can have events in different places because you can set up an event anywhere, you can set up a kitchen anywhere. So events will be more accessible, both in terms of attendance and location. That's my final one, and I'm going to keep this slide as you ask me any question you want, Matthew. And then what we can do is we can send the slides out to anybody who's on if you want.
Yeah, great point, Don. Thank you so much. We're going to share the slides in the app. I believe we're going to be cut off here in a moment while people go to the next session, but you and I can keep talking for another couple minutes, and we can edit this down for the replay version. So for those of you who joined us today, thank you for joining us. Thanks, Don, for speaking. He and I will continue for another couple minutes, and you'll be able to watch the replay with his final thoughts.
Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Yeah, and Don has shared his email and his Twitter account, so please follow him on Twitter. He's probably one of the most engaging people in our industry, and definitely reach out to him. All right, well, bye. Thank you, everybody. Thanks,
everybody.